Hello students! Today we're going to be talking about Dunn Halonen Chapter 10, and this is, I think, one of the most useful chapters in the book and one of the most important lectures we go over in relation to getting a job in psychology, because a lot of it is really focused on the tools that you use to present yourself, things like interviews, personal statements, and we've talked about a bunch of these briefly in the past, but we're going to dive into a few of these topics in a lot more detail. So let's get started with that. So one thing as a reminder, the chapter has a little bit bigger section on this, on the digital portfolio, but we've talked about this recently as well in chapter 9 and talked about the e-portfolio at Salt Lake Community College. Essentially, this is just a reminder, having a digital portfolio can be very, very useful. To help people see what kind of skills that you have. Again, I want to remind you of this little chart. You can make your own little chart. You can add a bunch more skills and then get examples from your work experience, your college experience, internship experience, any kind of experience that might show that you have this various skill. So kind of just a quick reminder on that because it is in the chapter. So quick reminder. Another thing I wanted to make you aware of is whether you're at Salt Lake Community College or transferring to another school or in a master's program, there are generally career centers for students. So the Career Services Center at Salt Lake Community College has a lot of really great resources. So here, looking up internship, there's this program that's essentially like a quick resume thing. A lot of companies use Handshake to send out job, like we want people for this job, and it might come directly to you. It also can help reduce some of the time it takes to fill out like repetitive things in applications like your birthday, your job history, things like that. So it can help with that. But there are a lot of resources here. So to help you reach your career goals, you can make an appointment. You can do things like they can help you search for internships, search for jobs. They can help you do an actual interview practice, whether that's like on Zoom or in person. You can do interview practice. They can review things like your personal statement or your resume or your CV and give you feedback on it. There are a lot more resources than I would expect, which I think really shows Salt Lake Community College. Oh, that just went back to the main page. I really think this shows Salt Lake Community College's goal of trying to get students into the workforce because there are so many resources. The first time I saw all these resources, I went and compared it to the resources that my grad school offers for career services. It was really, really sad to see the difference. There's a lot more resources at Salt Lake Community College. In fact, there's a couple things that I'm like, should I use that myself? That sounds really useful. So definitely go through this. There's events, things like that are offered on the campus, that are offered digitally as well. So use these resources. They're something that are available to you. Obviously, it's something that you have to go and seek out yourself. Sometimes you'll get emails of like the Career Center is doing this kind of project or bringing these people in or doing interview practice. Sometimes you'll get those, but there's a lot more events than at least I see emailed directly to me. So make sure you check what is available, especially in light of all of the things that we're talking about today, because basically each component that we're talking about, they can help you build those skills too, whether it be your resume, your CV, interview skills, things like that. There are also a pretty good alumni network here at Salt Lake Community College. Alumni networks are a good place to network with people who are already in the field, who might be people that you might want to do internships or shadowing with or even get jobs from. So it's a really good, useful tool that you can use. So also for alumni, you can use these same career services after you've graduated. So let's say you've graduated already and you need to come back and you want to do an interview practice at Salt Lake Community College, but you're not a student anymore, you're an alumni. You can do that. You can do one-on-one job skill interview practice sessions. And that is a really, really useful tool because it's a lot lower stakes, a lot less stress. You can practice things. You can send them, this is the job that I'm I have an interview in 3 days. Well, you probably need to give them a little more advance notice than that. But I want to interview for this type of position at this type of company. Here's a little information, and they can act out that interview with you. That can be interview skills, as we'll see in this lecture, is not something that I feel I'm that great with. So it's definitely a thing that I encourage, is to do the practice, to do interviews, even practice with peers in classes or friends and things like that. That can help you in the actual interview setting as well. Doing the practice, building those skills will make you better in interviews. So use those services and tools that the school provides for you. But let's talk about internships. So at Salt Lake Community College, there is that link. I think I just glanced over it as we were going through those pages, to look up internships, to find opportunities. Another thing that you can do is ask faculty, whether it's at Salt Lake Community College or another college, if there's a faculty member in, say, clinical psychology or social psychology or developmental psychology that does work, like you can tell from their examples and lectures that they do work in an area, you can ask them, do they know of internship opportunities available? So if you're talking to a professor, I would probably focus on the full professors there. So like me, for example, I'm an adjunct, so that means I haven't been working here as long as most of the full-time professors. It also means that me, as compared to them, I've probably lived in the area not as much time. So generally the full professors will have a better connection to the actual people around, like the people in the field, the people working in the community, and so they probably have a better idea than, say, an adjunct about what kind of internships are available. So asking full-time faculty is a really good thing. Look for links at whether it's Salt Lake Community College or another college that you transfer into for what kind of internship opportunities that they offer. So with this, generally in an internship, you're going to be working at an organization. So you will basically be an employee. You'll be kind of a training employee or a shadowing employee, but you'll be working there, getting relevant experiences, learning skills. Hopefully you can get an internship that's paid. Unfortunately, those are few and far between, but I really wish you the best of luck that you can get those. So with that internship, you're essentially doing work as you're learning the field. So you should already have some experience in psychology, which if you're in this class, you've at least taken 2 classes in psychology, and then you should have a pretty good idea of what kind of work you might want to go into. And an internship is a really great way to narrow down exactly what it is that you want to do. You'll see kind of the day-to-day. You might be shadowing someone, training under someone, you might be doing work on your own for a few months, like a semester to 6 months to a year, depending on the internship, and it'll really give you a sense of, is this the kind of work I want to do for years? Let's say, as an example, I did a internship in a clinical kind of setting, doing group therapy in a juvenile correction center, working with those clients, working with individuals, with other team members, and it was a really good program. And it helped me understand a lot more about what the kind of work was. So with that, I could tell that it was taxing on me. I was getting burnt out even with the internship. And there were certain tasks within the internship, more administration kind of tasks. So like doing the measures with them, doing the statistics, doing those kinds of things, and placements of people that I realized, oh, I liked this better. Later on, I did a job where I was doing more one-on-one clinical work with young people, and I got pretty burnt out within the first year of that. And so I realized, oh, well, this is not what I'm not going to be able to do this for multiple years. Like, I get too burnt out too easily. I take too much of the work home with me, essentially. And so I realized, oh, doing clinical work is not what I'm built for. So if you do an internship and realize, oh, I'm not built for doing the research, or I'm not built for doing the clinical work, I take it home with me, I can't separate those things. That kind of thing is what you would learn in that kind of an experience. So that is why internships, even shadowing, are so valuable, because you can get an actual taste of what the day-to-day work is actually like, and see the parts of it that you've romanticized and the parts of it that are more ugly than you would have expected. So, or like the things that you might not actually like as you get into the grind of doing the work. So with this, ask full-time faculty about internships that are available at Salt Lake Community College. These are the full-time I think we actually just hired 2 more full-time faculty, but they're not on this list. So these are the full-time faculty that were here when I first made this slide. And then I just got an email a few days ago about a couple more that came on this fall. But anyway, ask them about people in the community. This would probably be a better option because those new people have moved in, so they probably don't have a ton of connections in the community yet. But these people do have connections in the community. So look at the kinds of classes they teach. So clinical classes, for example. So with this, you might even be able at Salt Lake Community College to apply work experience in relevant fields towards credits. So if you're already working serving a community or with children with autism or something like that, that work that you're already doing might be able to be applied for credits in the psych program. So check about that at this link. Also check, email them, see if that could work. It's also a pretty good experience too. So with this, generally with internships, you're actually doing work. You'll probably train, you might have some shadowing. You're kind of separate from the regular workforce. People know you're an intern, but you are actually doing day-to-day tasks. You have jobs that you're supposed to do, you're expected to come at specific times, that kind of thing. And an internship can be anything from maybe 5 hours a week to 40 hours a week. Probably at your level, you wouldn't be doing a 40-hour-a-week internship, but that's the kind of range that you can be expecting. I'd expect to think of it kind of as a part-time job. So job shadowing is similar to internships, and with an internship, you'll probably be doing some job shadowing as well. But job shadowing specifically is not necessarily you doing the work, but you following a professional around while they do their work. And so depending on the kind of field, some clinical fields you need to do some job shadowing before you actually do an internship and are doing the work yourself, for example, as you get into the master's level training. With this, job shadowing can be a really good way to get good connections with someone in the field, because you probably have 1, maybe 2. I did know someone who was shadowing like 3 people at a company that were doing different jobs, but usually it's 1 person. So there's like 1 person who's your supervisor, who you follow around, you see how they do their work. As an example, the other day I was at my physical therapist and they had a student who is training to be a physical therapist shadowing them. And so literally they were just standing behind them like a shadow as my physical therapist was talking to me, going through the various tests and things like that. That's what you'll be doing. So if you were following me around on my day as a professor, you'd be coming to classes with me. I'd probably ask you to help grade papers, things like that. It's actually pretty hard to train someone. It takes a while to train someone to grade a paper, so I might not actually do that if you're shadowing for a short time. But this can be a good thing to do. You can have a formal shadowing program, or it can be an informal shadowing program. So if it's someone that you're connected to, that you're networking with, or that you'd want to work with, you can ask them if you could shadow them. And there might, depending on the kind of work they do, they might require, say, a background check or something like that. But in a lot of cases, it might be pretty informal, that they just have you come in one day and you can follow them around for a few days a week. Maybe over the course of a semester you go and you shadow them 10 days or something like that. You can also do a specific shadowing program. Some companies have these already set up that they will shadow. A lot of clinical places will do that. They have kind of, this is how we do shadowing at our company, this is how we do internships at our company. But you can just do this simply in a more or a less formal way by emailing a person or talking to them and asking if you could shadow them. And that can be a really good way to see what a person who's further along in their career does. It gives you a chance to ask them questions, like let's say they're going in between 2 tasks. You can ask them, well, why did you do this thing this way? Why did you do this thing this way? How do you set up your day? It's a really good way for you to get some experience and know what the kind of life would be in that job. Again, you're not exactly doing the work yourself in job shadowing, but it can be really a good way to kind of get a sense of it and get a taste of it. With internships, you could potentially see that, oh, I don't like doing this task. For job shadowing, you might be able to see a wider variety of tasks that would be being done in that job that you wouldn't be able to do as an intern. So, and again, they can be formal, they can be a little more informal. So these are things, the internships, the job shadowing, these are generally things that you need to seek out on your own to do. So with this, having that person, generally one person being the person you're shadowing, gives you a really good mentor to ask questions to, a good person in the field to network with, that kind of thing. So with this, talk to people in your network, like your friends, your family, your coworkers. So you might be working at Taco Bell, but maybe your coworker at Taco Bell has a uncle that is doing the kind of job that you want. So talk to people about what you're trying to do, what you want to do in your career, and that coworker at Taco Bell might open up basically a network opportunity for you to go and job shadow someone who's doing something similar to what you want to do. So it's a good thing to do, have people around you keep their ears open to know if there are opportunities around. So another thing you can do is the APA Education and Career Center. For some of the tools that are available here, you do need to have a membership. For students at the undergrad level, I forget how much it is. It's not very much money. It might be like $20 a year or something like that. For grad students, it's more. For professionals, it's a lot more. But for students, it's a pretty affordable thing, and they have a lot of resources. There are things that you can connect to and do without being a member of the American Psychology Association, but you get more access to things if you do pay for that membership fee. So I'm not saying you have to pay for the membership fee. There's a lot of useful things, like right here, CV and resume writing, interviewing and negotiating. A lot of these things you have access to. I'm not logged in right now. So I'm not logged in. So these are things that you could access without having an account. But there's a lot of things in their Education and Career Center that span the gamut of all kinds of jobs you can have in psychology. So if you see this as a really useful tool, if you navigate this and you say, oh, I really think this could be really useful, being on a list that I'm getting emails when this kind of job posting goes live, and you decide that that is worth being a member, great. Otherwise, there are tons of free tools here to help psychologists. I would say the amount of things focused on clinical, it's probably like 40% clinical, and then about 60% all the other fields. So it's definitely a little higher clinical focus, but I think that's okay. There's a lot of good tools and good resources here. So I wanted to let you know about that. All right, so another thing that you can do is the Occupational Information Network. So this is a ton of occupations. This is not just psychology. This was one that was recommended in this book, this specific one. There are lots and lots of web-based platforms to search jobs, things like even LinkedIn. There's a lot of different tools to find a job and have resources. So if you want, you can navigate through this, see if this is a useful tool, or find your own. There's a lot of different tools out there to help you find the opportunity for jobs, internships. I haven't seen as many that are focused on job shadowing, but a lot of times those are either kind of a setup program between a school and a company, or a school and a clinic or hospital or something like that, or just informal. Hey, can I come in and shadow you for a little while? Those kinds of things. So there's a lot of different networks for finding a job. The APA is a good one. The schools that you're at generally have good career center information for students specifically. So let's move on to resumes and CVs. So a resume and a CV are similar and dissimilar. Similar in the fact that it's a place to put your personal, academic, and professional qualifications. So a resume is generally shorter than a CV. At this point in your career, if you wrote a resume and a CV, they would probably look about the same. It wasn't until recently for me, like near the end of my PhD program, that I had basically I was updating a resume and a CV at the same time, and they finally really started to look different from each other. So at this point in your career as an undergraduate going through the program, they probably are going to look really similar for you. But we'll talk about what the differences are, what you might want to focus on when you're asked for a resume or a CV. Depending on the kind of job that you're looking for, it might say apply with a resume or CV. But if it asks specifically for a CV, you're going to want to use a CV. If it asks specifically for a resume, you're going to want to use a resume. I have applied to a few things that asked for a resume just with a CV because I thought it fit better and like had callbacks for that. But generally, if they ask for both, you can use either. Or I mean, if they ask for either, you can use either. But whichever one they ask for, that's the one you want to focus on. So make sure in every case to tailor your resume to every position that you apply for. So as an example, if I'm trying to get a position in a lab, like let's say as a lab manager in a research team, I would tailor my resume, like put things closer to the top or emphasize certain skills that are more relevant to being a lab manager than I would if applying to teach in a college setting. So for that, I would put maybe my education, so the classes I've taught, those kinds of skills more close to the top. So you might have a couple different versions of a resume and CV. So I have, for example, that's what I have. For my CV, I have for applying to research positions, a CV for applying to academic positions, and then another CV that's kind of like got everything in it. So it's kind of like a master CV that I pull from and keep that updated as I make and update the kind of more focused CVs. So make sure you tailor that for every position you apply for to make sure that you're kind of putting your best foot forward. You're showing really near the top, like literally near the top of a page. You've got, say, your contact information, your name over here, your experience over here, the most relevant experience. It doesn't even have to be the most recent experience. The most relevant experience to the job that you're applying for should probably be first. In the case of a CV, you generally put things in chronological order, but you can move, say, publications up or classes I've taught up, so that kind of thing. So in a resume, feel free to put, hey, this is, even though I haven't been doing this job for a year, this is the most relevant, put that one on top. That's totally all right. So it shows what kind of qualifications you have, what kind of skills that you have that are tailored to this specific job. So resumes are different in a couple different ways. A CV is usually much more focused on academic work and professional qualifications. So in a resume, I wouldn't put that I'm a member of the APA or the Humanistic Psychology Association. In a CV, that's included there too. In a resume, I might put a couple of the papers I've published. In a CV, it's literally a list of all the papers I've published chronologically. So CVs and resumes are different. The resume focuses more on like your job skills. It's generally shorter, briefer, making it easier for a hiring manager to go through that. CV is an exhaustive list, but again, even with a CV, you can move things around. So when I'm applying for a teaching position, I will often put the teaching experience I have up. When I'm applying to an academic research position, I'll put my publications above that. So it's kind of just take that whole page, move it up or down kind of thing. So you can do that too to tailor it. So let's see this little video about the differences, and we'll emphasize a few of these points, and yeah, this will talk about some that I haven't talked about.
So you're asked to submit a CV for a job application. Maybe you're thinking, what is a CV and how is it different from a resume? Let us help you with a quick overview of resume versus a CV. Typically, the key difference between a resume and a CV is that a resume is a concise summary of one's experience in a variety of categories, while a CV emphasizes a more detailed account of one's academic-related experiences.
I would say a CV is a lot more exhaustive. It's got essentially everything versus resume. Resume, you want to keep, if you can, have it be one single page, 2 pages maximum versus a CV. End of career psychologist CVs are like 30 plus pages. It's amazing how many things you pack in a CV. Mine's like 8 pages right now.
Also, an entry level resume tends to be one page, while a CV is usually multiple pages. Okay, so now maybe you're wondering, how do I know which one to use? CV stands for Curriculum Vitae, which is Latin for the course of your life. What this means is that a CV is literally your life story. In some countries, the term
So the highlighted word there, your academic life story, is pretty essential. So a CV would definitely be used in the case of applying to a grad school. So for a master's program or a doctoral program, a clinical position after a master's or doctoral program, you would probably be putting a CV rather than a resume. For a job with, say, with your psych degree with a bachelor's, you'll probably be doing a resume. So an academic kind of posting, probably be doing a CV. Something with your associate's or bachelor's degree, you'll probably be doing a resume. So that's not always going to be the case. There might be some master's level positions that you're needing that ask for a resume too. But kind of in general.
term CV is used synonymously with resume. However, in the US, these tend to be very different documents. Here's how.
So that's a good thing to recognize as well if you're applying to places outside the US. If you're applying within the US and they say resume, they probably want a resume. If they want a CV, they probably want a CV. If you're applying in the UK, those can often be interchangeable, so you might want to even email whatever the hiring person is. You're like, hey, I'm from the US, just wanted to make sure that you want a CV, or would you want something more like a resume? Because they'll know the difference, like the hiring manager will know the difference between those.
The CV goes the extra mile to highlight not just work experience and education, but also awards, honors, publications, conference presentations, achievements, affiliations, skills, and more.
And that's really why the CV is so much longer, is because of all of these things included in there. So the publications section is really useful for anybody who is, let's say, trying to hire you as, let's take an example of trying to get a full-time professor position. So a tenure track professor position. Depending on the school, they will have different requirements for research. So do you need to publish 1 paper a year, 2 papers a year, more than 3 papers a year? They will be able to look at all the publications you've done and what years you did those. So say, oh, so this school requires 2 publications per year. This person on average is doing 3 publications per year. So they will probably be able to handle this job. Versus if they look at that and say, oh, this person generally gets 1 publication a year, but there's some skips here. I don't know if they could handle the rigor of doing 2 publications as well as teaching classes. So with that, presentations, it really shows all of the work you've always done. So if you look at someone who is really far into their career, maybe someone who's just retired from a psych department, look at their CV and you can see a lot about what were their research interests at different times of their life. Were they always interested in heroism, or did they move to really focusing on community health interventions? So that's a specific example of a person that I'm familiar with in the field who's kind of like a mid-career psychologist who I've worked with before. So they started off, they were working really heavily in heroism, then they worked really heavily with veterans issues, and now they're moving a little from veterans issues to specifically community health interventions in a specific city. And so to see through these lists of what kind of presentations were they doing, what kind of publications, what were the titles of those things, because that's basically what it is. The APA citation for this was the publication's citation, or what was the presentation's name, what conference were they going to, and that can let you know if they were always going to social psych conferences, they are probably pretty familiar with social psych. But if they're applying for a developmental psych position and they've never gone to a developmental psych conference and they've never published in a developmental psych journal, you would probably pick someone that has done those things over the person who, depending on what you're looking for. Affiliations also helps, as well as things like achievements, because it shows, hey, I've gotten these different awards or achievements for teaching or for research, that kind of thing. You can have a whole section on specific skills. I basically have them listed. It's not a very pretty way to do it, just like these are the kinds of programs I can run to do statistics, things like that. Affiliations is really good too, because it can show you, hey, this is my network. These are the people I know. These are the people I've worked with, and the person or the team hiring for that academic position can look at that and be like, oh, maybe we should call, or I should email this person and ask them about this person if they know the applicant. That's the word I was looking for, applicant. But that's why CVs are so lengthy and so long. It really is everything academic that you've ever done.
These extra categories highlight skills most relevant to academic settings, which is why the CV is most beneficial for graduate school applications. It is also used by people with or pursuing advanced degrees, such as graduate students and postdoctoral scholars. On the other hand, a resume is more focused on relevant workplace skills, which are demonstrated through experiences such as jobs, internships, volunteering, and extra.
So this is the key difference, is that a resume at your level with getting an associate's, a bachelor's, probably shooting for a one-page resume would be perfect. So you can really highlight what specific job experience you have that is relevant to what you're trying to apply for. So you might have worked at Taco Bell. You might have been a manager at Taco Bell. Are you applying to a manager position? You probably want to emphasize the manager time at Taco Bell rather than all the skills that you learned at Taco Bell. Making a crunch wrap is a great skill, and I'm very happy that that skill exists, but the management skill is probably a little more useful for that job that you're trying to get, right? So as long as it's a management skill you're trying to get. Your internships, so even if you realize during an internship that this is not exactly what you want to do, that's a good thing to put on your resume to give them people to contact about your work, to show the skills that you've gained there, that you've worked in a place. It gives a person reading a resume a lot more trust that you can do the kind of job that you've applied for. Volunteering work can be a really good thing too. You can do job shadowing through volunteering. You can get into an internship through volunteering. Volunteering in and of itself, you're probably not going to do all the same tasks that you might do in an internship, for example, but you can do some of those. That's good experience. Again, internships, job shadowing, volunteering, all of these things are extra things that you're going to have to go and seek out outside of class. So you're going to have to budget time for yourself to be able to do that and focus these, because you could do a job shadow, you could do an internship, you could volunteer all together as well as working a part-time or even full-time job. You could possibly do that, right? But the better thing to do would be focus on what fits your career goals. So if you want to work in a clinical setting, you want to work one-on-one with people, doing therapy, shadowing someone who does that, much better than maybe volunteering in a soup kitchen. Still good experience, still look good on a resume. One's going to build more skills and teach you more about the field than the other. Obviously, volunteer, help do direct action, even if it's not for your resume too. Extracurriculars as well. There are things that you can learn, even doing sports. There's things you learned making crunch wraps. There's skills that you gained in the things that you've done. So making a resume, it's about writing it in a way that shows what skills that you have that would be really great for this job you're applying for.
Undergraduate students and graduates with early careers are typically expected to submit a resume when applying to jobs in industry, nonprofits, and the public sector. The bottom line is, if you are an undergrad and an employer asks you for a CV, it is a good idea to follow up with them and clarify if this is really what they mean before submitting your application. Now that you know some of the distinctions between a resume and a CV, you can confidently tailor the right document for whatever kind of opportunities are in your future. Thank you for watching.
And so the tailoring of that document is really key. So tailoring it for the specific job that you're trying to get is very important. All right, so back to how to write a resume. There's a couple key critical skills for like APA recommendations for writing a resume that you should really follow. APA style is different than MLA style, and we'll talk about APA style in regards to papers in this class. But right now we're going to focus on a couple rules for them for resumes and CVs. So for resume, specifically for resume, 1 to 2 pages. Try to stick to 1 page if you've got an associate's or a bachelor's. If you've got a lot of relevant job experience, a lot of relevant internship experience, put it onto 2 pages. That's totally fine. But try to focus on those things. And this over here is obviously too blurry to read the text, but you can find examples of resumes. With a resume, it can be colorful. That can help it stand out. You can have a picture of yourself if you want. One thing to do is have it really clearly delineated. Like over here, it looks like they've got the person's contact information, probably a digital portfolio here. Their objective is listed out clearly here, and then they've got a couple different sections. So communication, leadership, experience, education, and their name. Right, so each of these sections is really, and here it says references. It probably says references available by request, and that's totally fine. We'll talk about references in a second though. But it's really clear, it's easy to read. You pick up this 1 page and you can get a really clear picture of what kind of skills this person has. If the resume is in really good shape, that's better than a resume that's not in good shape. But it also needs to be very readable. So having different sections, different headings is very useful. So using a serif text. What is a serif text? Well, it's basically saying how are the letters shaped. So serif text and sans serif text look like this. So this is serif. This is sans serif. Sans means no. So no serifs. Serifs are these little tails on the letters. So the text here in the slide that I'm putting the mouse around, this is a sans serif text. And actually research shows that we understand and we can read quicker, more easily on a screen. So like a projector screen, a screen in a computer, a display on, say, a projector screen. So if I'm doing a lecture in person in class, putting the PowerPoint up like this, having a sans serif text is a little bit easier on your brain. You read it a little quicker, you grasp it a little better. In a written document on a page, so let's say in a book, on a resume, this is the calendar for the class, but let's say on a resume, research shows it's a little easier to read a serif font. So Times New Roman is an example of a serif font. It's got the little tails. Sans serif, like Arial, is a good example of a font that does not have a serif. So for a digital presentation, maybe for your digital portfolio, you want to put that all in sans serif. In your resume, that's actually a printed document, you probably want that in a serif font. So avoid complete sentences and I statements. So try to have bullets. So here you can see there's a bullet here that kind of just describes some of the skills that they have. So the shorter you make your sentences, like the more focused on the skill that you have, the better. So including action words like supervised staff or developed evaluation tools. So you developed things, with that you created them, you supervised staff, you were doing an action. Using things like that can really help build your resume and show that you were very active in doing things. So don't include information unrelated to the current application. So let's say you've only ever had one job and that was Taco Bell. I didn't actually work at Taco Bell. I'm just craving tacos right now. My first job was at fast food though. It was at a frozen custard shop. Frozen custard's much better than ice cream. And I will stick to that. But I wouldn't include that in an application where I don't have any relevant skills. right? So if there's other things, if my volunteering experience is more useful, if my if you've only done one job, having that job experience that you've done that work down at the bottom of your resume could be a really good idea. But putting things near the top, this is the most relevant to this position, that will be best. So if you've only had the one job at Taco Bell or a frozen custard shop, you can still include that to show that you have the skills to be going to work. There's people who know that you can work. You've worked at it for 3 years. That shows a lot of dedication over that time, and that you've probably interacted with a lot of different kind of customers, right, in that kind of food service position. So remember though, each resume should be tailored to that specific position. So let's say you're applying to two similar positions from two different places. Those resumes, if they're really similar positions, they might be the same resume. If they're a little bit too different though, you might want to do a separate resume that emphasizes things, maybe swapping the order of some of the things on the resume. So proofread, make sure there's not spelling errors or grammar errors. This is one that I mess up on all the time. I spell things poorly enough that you've probably noticed it on some slides, honestly. I sometimes spell things so poorly that the computer thinks it's another word. So basically, I've spelled a different word than the word I intended. So proofreading, career services at Salt Lake Community College will do that for you as well, but you can have other friends, mentors, a person you're shadowing, review your resume, your CV, and give you tips. So especially someone in the field, if you're shadowing them or you're interning, you can ask them, hey, will you review my resume and maybe give me some tips? And some of the things that they tell you might be really useful for boosting up your resume. Asking the Career Services Center to look over it too is a really great resource. Having a draft, sending it in, getting feedback will make you make it better. So include your contact information. Depending on where you're putting the resume or CV, there might be things that you leave off or include. So I have a CV that's accessible to anybody, could just search for it. You could Google it, you could find my CV. I do need to update it. And it has an email, but I haven't included my phone number there or like my address. That's probably a good practice, right? Someone who finds it online, they can email me, but I don't want them knowing my home address or my phone number necessarily. But if I send in a resume or a CV to a hiring manager, I'll include my phone number, I'll include my address. So think about what contact information you want out there. You can be a little bit flexible and creative in descriptions of work. So let's say if Taco Bell is your work experience, but you've worked there for 2 years, you can talk about your experience with customers, dealing with humans who might be angry or upset or stressed out in a more creative way to show what kind of skills you have to de-escalate situations, for example. You might not have specific training in relation to it. Like you might never have gone through a de-escalation training in Taco Bell training, but in your experience over those couple years, you might have learned how to help de-escalate situations. And that might be a really relevant skill to talk about. So be a little flexible or creative in the way that you talk about those skills and think critically about the skills that you have. Because I assure you, if you're doing work, if you're doing internships, you're building skills. Even within the classroom setting and doing the assignments and the projects and things like that, you're building skills that will help you in any career. All right, so what are some key parts of a resume? I know this is kind of a long discussion today about resumes, but it's also a very important one. So key parts of a resume: your objective. What do you want? Why are you sending this resume in? Why are you sending it to this specific company? Are there more than one position that you're trying to get at that company? So probably if that was the case, send multiple resumes with different objectives. So with this, a precise statement saying, I want to be say it in a better way than this, but you're saying, my objective is to be this person at this company. You have this position open, I want that position. Obviously say it a lot more flowery than I just described it, but that's what you're trying to show. You're trying to say, this is the kind of position I want. If there's two positions, for example, my partner was just applying to jobs the other day and there were two available. One was as an adjunct faculty, another was like a student support specialist that would help with like academic advising kind of thing. And so with that, that's two very different objectives. Some of the skills listed in the CV are the same, but a very, very different objective. One is to support students in like picking classes and things like that, or to get that position. The other one is to be a faculty member. So very, very different objectives. So make sure it's specific, and make sure that you're keeping your files saved separately so you're sending the correct file to each job. A skill summary is another key part of the resume, and one of the biggest ones, well, really a resume is so short, everything on it is really important. So the skills summary talks about your skills. So specific skills that are really relevant for that specific position. This might include things that you've achieved, awards you've got, even things like grades you've got could be relevant here, abilities that you have. These kinds of skills can come from training in school, training in the field, training in a different kind of job. It could be experience shadowing or experience from internships. And you don't have to have each and every one of those, right? But having your skills highlighted to show these are the skills I have that'll be really relevant to this job is very important. So here's a couple examples of things that you might include in your skills. And again, when we talked about doing the digital portfolio, we talked about a lot of other skills as well. So really take some time to think about the skills that you have, the skills that you're trying to build, so that you can include those. Education is another chunk. So what is your education? What have you done in the sense of degrees? Do you have your high school diploma? Do you have your associates? Do you have your bachelor's? Do you have your master's? Do you have your doctorate? So including those degrees on there. Academic honors or awards can be really good. So if you were the valedictorian or salutatorian, I think that's how to say that, include that there. If you got some kind of specific education award, that was in addition to maybe a high school diploma or your associates, maybe it was in a dual language program, that could be really relevant and show that, well, you were doing more work than another person who had that same degree. So you don't need to include your high school diploma after getting a college degree. So usually depending on the resume, to keep it shorter, you can keep just your most recent degree. So your associate's degree. Well, that shows, well, you did work beyond high school. I'm not sure if all over the country, if you have to have a diploma to be enrolled, but some states you do. But showing your most recent. So let's say you have a bachelor's degree. Including just that, you don't have to include your associates. If there were specific skills that you got during your associates or during high school, you can include that in other ways and say the skills. But to keep it a little shorter and sweeter, talking about your most recent degree in a resume is a useful tool. You don't have to have the whole list. In a CV, you would have every one of them included because it's a really exhaustive list. Not your high school diploma generally, though, even on a CV. So some people only, well, I just said that. And then your experience. So your experience section might be your longest section. Skills section might arguably be your longest section. There might be overlap between these as well, but having skills specifically listed in a skills section, having experience like I worked at this job or this internship, I did this job shadowing. So depending on what it is, skills or experiences might be your longest section. Generally for experience, you do want it chronological, your most recent first, but again, you can be a little flexible too. If your most relevant experience to the position you're applying for was the one you were at, not the most recent one, maybe put it first, and that's okay. Make sure the dates are marked clearly so they can see that. But that can really show that, hey, this is an experience that was very useful for this current position. Having a little bit of description, you don't have to have full sentences. The first resume I had like a short paragraph of things in my experience, I was trying to describe absolutely everything, and it was just way too long. It wasn't a really good resume. So maybe a bullet with maybe 6 words to describe what that experience, what skill that gave you, what kind of training or how that helped you prepare for doing this job you're applying for. Accomplishments is a good thing to include here, unless you have enough accomplishments that you want to put it in its own section. So activities and volunteering. So with that, again, activities and volunteering, you might have some of those included in experience. So, or it might make sense to have a maybe job experience and volunteering experience separate, depending on the kind of position you're applying for, depending on the kind of experience you do have. So volunteering might be relevant extracurriculars. So if you were on sports teams, teams can build teamwork, right? That might be a skill you want to talk about in relation to activities. So here you could put internships. Again, those could be in experiences. Volunteer work, again, that could be experiences. You could put it under activities or volunteering. Don't stretch to add a lot here if there's not really anything there. It's okay if you only have 3 relevant experiences, right? Or even 2 or even 1, right? If your relevant experience is the skills you've gained in your education, talk about those things. You don't want to try and repeat the volunteering experience in 3 different places. That can look like you're padding your resume, and that might not look as good as just focusing on having some blank space at the bottom and saying, hey, I did this volunteering experience, it gave me a lot of good skills, that kind of thing, rather than trying to talk about it in multiple places. And references. So always ask the person you are going to be using as a reference before using them as a reference. It might even be good if it's been a couple years to ask them again. So just sending them an email, asking, can I use you as a reference, talking to them in person if it's a faculty member or a person that you're shadowing or under as an intern. Ask them, hey, can I use you as a reference for my resume? And they'll probably say yes. If not, that's okay. And then just keep track of that person's contact information going forward so you can include them. So a name, I think it's good practice. Different people will tell you different things. Having a name as your references, so having a list of names, I think is good practice, and then putting contact information available on request is useful because you don't really want to share a person's contact information far and wide. So let's say you're sending 18 resumes over the course of a week or a month. It'd be a pretty busy week. If you've sent 18 resumes and all of them have this person's personal information, their phone number, their email, they might not want that out there that wide. It could be picked up by a random person there who sees their contact information. So I like to include a name of a person and then contact information available by request. If they require you to have contact information, maybe only include an email, not a telephone number or an address. But if they then request the person's contact information, then sending those few individuals who are asking for your references, sending those few individuals the phone number, the address, that can be a good thing to do. So I try not to put all the information. For example, what if it's not currently, but what if one of my references was Philip Zimbardo? I wouldn't put his phone number, his address, and his email on all my resumes. Someone might be like, oh, I've heard of Philip Zimbardo. I want to get in contact with that person. You want to be more careful and judicious with people's personal information. So especially if they're a reference. So with this, you can include contact information in a resume. If you're only applying to a few very specific jobs, it's up to you. Different people will say, yes, include all the contact information because that makes it easier, quicker for a person who's hiring to contact those references. But at the same time, I feel uncomfortable personally with sharing a person's contact information out there into the world like that. I don't think that's an appropriate use of their kindness in letting you use them as a reference, to just have their contact information out there for anybody to potentially see in an unsecured state. So you can include it in your resume. Some people just put contact information available on request. I don't generally recommend that, but you could to just say references available by request. That is acceptable. I like to include a name and then contact information available by request. So they see, oh, this person has references, and I need to contact Professor Riches to get that contact information to contact them. So is it really much different than just saying contact or references available on request? It's not too much different, but at least they might be able to see, oh, this person is, their name is on the references. I see, oh, they wrote a paper with them in the past or something like that. So it is useful. So these are the kinds of information you should include for reference: a person's name, their title, so like their job title, their academic or work affiliation, so which company do they work for, which school are they at, their mailing address, their email address, and their phone number. So because of all those details, it could be pretty easy to, say, find or contact someone. That's the main reason I try to just include just the name and then the other material when I'm asked for those references. That also gives you a little tool to know which jobs are thinking of you more. So it is possible there might be a hiring manager who says, okay, these two resumes are the same. I think both these candidates could be equally good. This one has contacts I can contact right now. This one I have to contact them and throw yours out. That is a possibility. So there's that risk benefit or cost benefit analysis you should do. But I definitely include the names of your references, but not all their contact information. So let's talk about interviews. And like I mentioned, interviews is not interviewing skills are not one that I feel I have very well. I've done interviews in different settings. I've been the person who was giving the interview for a job. I've obviously been the one who's done interviewing for a job. I've interviewed people in my research methods. So with that being said, I do feel like I've got the research interview skills down pretty well. But not all of those translate to interviewing for a job well, and being the person being interviewed. So this is a really good video from someone who is in a clinical psych PhD program, and they talk about their experience, the skills, the things that they did, and I think they have more, at least from their descriptions, they have more interview skills than I do, and they did more interviews than I did for my graduate program as well. So this is really, really focused on getting into, say, a master's or a PhD program in an academic setting, but the skills that they're talking about and the things that they did to prepare are really relevant to any kind of job interview. So let's watch this.
You got an interview. Wait a second. I know exactly how you're feeling. I'm a psychologist, so I'm a mind reader, of course. Just. Okay, so I'm sensing a little bit of excitement for sure, but also maybe mixed in with a little bit of ah! Did I get it right? Not surprising. Well, don't worry, I've got you. But first, hello. My name is Miranda and I'm a second-year trainee clinical psychologist, and today I'm going to be laying out my top 10 tips to help you prepare for interview so that you can later annihilate them.
So this person is currently in the second year of their doctoral or, well, PhD program. So they're in the second year of their doctoral program. So they've been through one entire year already. So it's been about a year and a half since they were doing the interview process to get into grad school. So this is really focused on grad school. But again, the skills and things talked about in this video are really relevant even outside of grad school interviews. For any kind of job interview. And I think this person, like I said, has way more skills than I do in interviewing, so listen to them.
So I will be drawing on my experiences of interviewing for the clinical psychology doctorate. However, I think this advice really can be applied to any interview. It's that tasty. But anyway, I know you're a busy person, you got places to be, you got people to see. So let's get right into it with my tip number 1. Try to replicate the interview conditions when you're practicing. It's okay, I'm going to explain what I mean, don't panic. So when you get invited to interview, you're usually sent some information about what that interview setup is going to be like. So, for example, Am I going to be interviewed by one person? Is it going to be a panel? Is it going to be via Zoom? Is it going to be via the telephone? Now, each interview setup is going to bring with it its own unique set of challenges.
Before that leaves the screen, if you don't know, so if they don't tell you, if you've sent in a resume, you've sent in a CV, and they say, hey, can you come in and interview, or can you meet me on Zoom to interview, but they don't say anything more about it, you can definitely ask. You can ask, I'm just curious, will I be meeting with one person? Will there be 2 interviews back to back? You can ask them what the interview format will look like. Because how you interact or practice interacting with one individual is going to be different than how you interact with 3 individuals. If there's 3 people on Zoom, that's going to be a little different than just one person on Zoom. The phone is very weird. I hate phone interviews. That was actually what I had for my graduate program. And it was a cold call phone interview. I had been preparing and practicing things, but I was just in the middle of doing dishes one day, and I got a call from Claremont Graduate University, one of the faculty members there, and that was my interview. It wasn't a call to set up an interview. A little stressful. Luckily, I'd been preparing, but the things are different. Generally, it won't be like that. Oftentimes, companies will schedule a meeting time. The thing with CGU is they tried to get their acceptances out before other schools to make sure they kind of locked you into that. So they tried to get people signed up earlier than other schools so that they weren't having to compete as much. So again, if you have not been told in an email or before what the kind of interview will look like, ask. See if it'll be one person, multiple people. Just ask. It's totally all right.
Set of challenges, and it's really important to try and practice within the same format so that you don't get any nasty surprises that are going to throw you off your game. Let me give you an example. For my very first interview for the clinical psychology doctorate, I was interviewed by a panel of 4. Now, I had only ever practiced being interviewed by one person, and let me tell you, having 8 eyeballs looking at you all at once, waiting for answers, is very different to just the very friendly 2 eyeballs. And because of this, before I'd even been asked any questions, my anxiety went through the roof, my heart was in my stomach, and I really couldn't focus on what I was being asked. In retrospect, if I had practiced the setup a little bit more, I wouldn't have been so freaked out by the interview situation and had a little bit more headspace to actually focus on the questions. Which I think is a really good point to bring in interview tip number 2. Practice with the interviewer from hell. Just like the interview scenario, the interviewers themselves can massively throw you off your game.
So these are 2 things that you can do at, say, the Career Center. You can ask them, hey, I'm going to be in an interview. I want to practice with 2 people. I want to practice with 3 interviewers. I want to practice with 4. It might be hard to do 4 in a quick turnaround because of just how many employees they have. But you could schedule that in advance, right? So, and you can plan that on Zoom. And this is something to ask. Ask them to be really tough on you. That could be really good. Maybe your first time, ask them to go really easy on you. Then maybe the second time you go into practice, ask them to go really hard on you for the interview. And so that is really useful, especially doing it multiple times. You'll learn new things each time. You'll get more comfortable. You'll start building these skills. You'll see where you have skills, and you can maybe emphasize those. Maybe you'll see weaknesses that you have and be able to adjust for that in the future. So when you come to one of the actual real interviews, you've got those skills.
Basically, these first 2 tips are about trying to become an indestructible, unflappable, psychological ninja so that you can zone out everything that isn't important when it comes to interviewing. So my very first panel looked something like this. Seriously. Everything about them, their non-verbal, their faces, told me,
honey, it's time to wrap this up, move it along and get out.
And it's actually really hard to keep talking when you're speaking to essentially a brick wall. My second panel, honestly, it was like they had planned this. Everything I said, they were looking at each other going, like ferociously writing things down halfway through my sentences when I hadn't even said anything intelligent. And it was so incredibly distracting that I kept losing my train of thoughts. And I'm not saying...
And it might stink to think about that, but often interviewers plan to interview in a specific way. They will plan to... Not every single one, but you might have interviews, you might have panels that try to throw you off your game, that ask you a question completely outside of what this job entails, just to see how you deal with that kind of stress in this kind of situation. They're trying to see different skills that you have in person in these moments that are not just always... that might not be things that you see as being directly related to the job. If they see it as related to the job or the position, they might ask things that seem funny or seem strange. They might have a really stern face and try to show they're really grumpy, or they might be really, really happy and not give anything away that way. They might be really flat affect intentionally. They might be doing it unintentionally. As the interviewer, I'm probably just a little less nervous than the person I'm interviewing when interviewing for a job. But again, like I said, those interview skills are not ones that I have very well. And that's why I work on it and practice.
Things to freak you out, because I've had some very lovely, encouraging, in a normal way, interviewers. But the chances are you are going to encounter someone who knowingly or unknowingly is going to make your life difficult. So it's a good idea to practice this. Practice with someone who gives you nothing, gives you too much, interrupts you, or if you're ready for level 2, maybe an interviewer who actually undermines you. Then nothing is going to get in your way. My third bit of advice would be to get your house in order. And by this I mean, have a bit of a think of the things that you would like to say in response to some of the more generic questions which you're likely to come up against. So for example, for the deep clean site, it's usually...
So these questions are really good examples that you might see in a lot of like graduate programs that you're going into. You can look up, just search on, say even Reddit. I found some good interview questions that people had been asked. And prepare answers for those. Think about how you would respond to those kinds of things. So think about the position you're going for, and other people have applied and interviewed for jobs like that, or that same job even. So try and find what kind of questions you're expected to be or you expect to be asked, and prep an answer for that. Then you'll do better. And you can include that. You can even send that to, say, the Career Center and say, hey, can you ask these couple questions and then give me feedback on my responses? So you've looked those up, you've set an appointment for the practice interview, you've prepped an answer, and now you test out that answer on a live human person.
A good idea to have a clinical case that you can talk about and a bit of research that you were involved in that you can discuss. There are some other questions which I will write in the description box below, but to be honest, I don't want to spend too much time dwelling on these, because in my experience, you only ever get 1 or 2 of these generic questions pop up, and it's always the things that you don't prepare for that you end up being asked about. However, it is a good move to have some ideas formulated for these kinds of questions, because in my experience, if you get asked something basic and you start tripping up over yourself, you're gonna look like a bit of a doofus. So it's good to have a few things planned out. In the same vein, my 4th tip would be to know your current issues. Now, I'm gonna put my hands up. I'm not the best at staying on top of these things. And if you're in that camp as well, it's okay. Don't worry. We can do a little bit of research before our interview to understand some of the issues which are affecting people and the profession more generally. So the big ones that spring to mind would be discussions around racism, around diversity, and the global pandemic. To be honest, I wouldn't really try to memorize anything big or fancy, because when you get to interview, you're gonna be nervous. And if you don't know the topic inside out and you're trying to regurgitate something fancy in the interview room, you're probably gonna tie yourself up in knots and just confuse yourself. So keep it simple.
So with that, if you know those examples, the global pandemic still exists at the time of recording this. So having a prepped response, knowing how it's affecting the field in general, how it's affecting clinical populations coming into, and you're thinking of being a therapist, that's going to have an effect. Being in an academic setting, it's going to have an effect there, right? So think about the kind of position that you're looking for. If you're doing research, for example, I wanted to do studies in high school, but it was during the pandemic, and so teachers were already super stressed out with all the changes that they had, that I couldn't get into high schools to do research. So knowing these kinds of things, the challenges facing the field, asking a person you're shadowing or interning with, what are the challenges that are facing the field right now? What are the big critical things people talk about? So diversity, ethics, the pandemic, those are probably good ones to start with, depending on what kind of area you're looking into. But yeah, ask people who are doing the work that you want to do, what are the challenges facing it, and have kind of an idea about what you would talk about. You don't have to have a bunch of papers memorized to cite off a bunch of different quotes, but have some ideas of what is facing the field and how it might affect you particularly, and what you do in your work.
As with your preparation for the more generic questions, I think it's just a nice idea to brainstorm a couple of ideas so you've got a plan laid out, but you're not too formulaic when the time comes. Tip 5 would be to dress like a boss. Now, interviews are one of the best opportunities you have to upgrade your life, so do not attend looking crusty. I know formal wear can be expensive. This does not need to break the bank. We just need to say hello to our affordable friends of the high street fashion brands. Or maybe you can even borrow a little thing or two from your friend who works in finance. Also, formal wear...
So even that, I would say, is buying things for the interview can be a really tough challenge for a lot of people going into an interview. So if going to a thrift store, Savers for example, that can be a good way to do this. Also, there are different career centers that offer a clothing rental, like formal clothing, and it's not actually like you pay, it's like you check it out. It's a library. Yeah, library is a better thing to say than rental. The Salt Lake Community College Career Center, they have a clothing library. So I don't know how extensive it is, but they do talk about it, and I've seen some examples of clothes from it, and it looks like a really useful tool. So doing something like that, checking out clothes for an interview, can be a really great resource. And there's other community resources that do that too. You might need to do a little bit of looking, because if you transfer to, say, another program, I don't know if their career department would offer that. But there's generally community resources that offer that kind of thing to help you to have a clothing library to check out. So you don't need to spend any money to pick something up. Yeah, check for those kinds of things like clothing libraries.
It doesn't need to be a suit and tie vibe. In my interview where I got on, I went with some very, very cute wide-legged spotty trousers and this blouse which had a kind of frills down the front, kind of like what you'd imagine a flamenco dancer to be wearing if she had an office job. And this was intentional. I wanted the gods of Latin spice to be with me in the interview. So if you want to show a little bit of personality through your clothes, that's okay. Just remember, no crust allowed. My tip 6 would be...
So one good suggestion I've seen from a lot of different places about interviews is look at what the people doing your job currently are wearing, and then dress one level more formal than that. So if everybody's coming in like just kind of a businessy casual, and that's a really broad term depending on the company you're looking at. Let's say this is what you're wearing. No tie, buttoned up shirt like this. Well, another step up from this would probably be a tie, right? So that's a simple example. If everybody is wearing something like this, where they don't have a tie, putting a tie on, looking at whatever kind of outfits, if everybody who's working there is wearing jeans and t-shirts, having like a polo shirt or a collared shirt, or if you wouldn't want to go like tuxedo formal dress, but having like a nice dress could work, right? So like one step above. You don't want to jump too far above, or you might look out of place. But if you look like the worker's there and just like one step more nice, it shows like you're taking this seriously. It should show that you know what's expected there as well, and that you're trying to present yourself well. So that can be good. So basically what people are wearing there, you can ask, again, the people you're shadowing, interning, faculty, people working in the area. Just go hang outside the office one day and see what people are wearing as they come out to leave to go home. Yeah, be careful with that. Don't be taking pictures probably. That might be a little creepy. But yeah, just one step above what other people are wearing.
To use your first 10 seconds well. Before you get into the interview, there's usually going to be a bit of preamble, where they ask you how you are, etc., etc. This is where the first impression is made. Use it well. In my very first interview, I was nervous. I didn't know if I was trying to be cute or endearing or what, but when I was asked how I was just like,
Hello, I'm okay. I'm a bit nervous.
which is fine, but actually looking back, if I'd given some thought of how I wanted to handle that question, that isn't the version of myself that I really wanted to put across. In the interview where I did actually manage to get a place, when I was asked that question, I was all, yeah, I'm great. I'm really excited to be here. Who are you?
So this is a really good example of something you might not necessarily think of, is that build up, that first impression there. You come into the room, or they come to pull you from the hallway or like a seating area or something like that. That first impression can be a really big deal, and showing that kind of confidence, prepping for that, maybe practicing a couple different things. Because at least for me, it's those first couple seconds where I'm the most nervous, right? After those first couple seconds, those nerves die down a lot, but having something prepared, being ready, even something short like that in this example is a really great way to jump into the interview on a good foot.
You're gonna hire? Is it that girl? Or is it this girl? It's this girl. Tip 7 would be to stop speaking. When you're in the interview, in the nicest possible way, just shut your mouth. When you're practicing, just get yourself into a habit of giving yourself a couple of seconds after the question has been asked to think about what you're going to say. Obviously, this does not apply if they ask you something like, can you confirm your name and date of birth? Because they're going to worry about you if you're like... But otherwise, a little bit of silence can help you to get your thoughts in order. In my very first interview, I really wanted to sound like fluent and knowledgeable, so as soon as I was asked something, I would just launch into my answer, which meant that 30 seconds in, I was kind of like,
I don't know where I'm going with this.
which just made everything come out a little bit jumbled. So if you get yourself into the practice of being comfortable with silence, you can be a little bit more strategic about your answers and actually think about what you want to say.
And this is also relevant for a practice interview, is if you let them know, hey, these are a couple of things I've been working on. I want to see if I'm doing well here. I want to take a minute after a question and think about it. If you let them know in advance that this is what you're planning on doing in a practice interview, it can really help, because they can be watching for that and giving you feedback. Oh, yes, after this question, you waited a good amount of time. After this question, it really made me wonder, though, if you knew what you were talking about, or you were trying to make things up because you were waiting too long, like that kind of thing. Let them know before a practice interview. Also, with this, depending on the interview format, you might be able to write down notes. So that is a tool that I use a lot of the time when doing an interview in research, and so this is a skill that I brought in, is to take notes on the question. It might be literally 3 words, like one word of like one of my ideas, another word about like this is what the question was about. So 1 or 2 or 3 words. I'm not writing out a whole sentence. So I'm writing a couple key little things to kind of remind me what the question was, especially if it's a multi-part question. You might answer the entire first part, but if you've forgotten that second part of that question, then that wouldn't be as good as having an answer to the whole thing. You're not always going to be able to write down and take notes, but taking this couple seconds to think about your response, like plan, oh, I'll talk about this, then I'll talk about this, and then starting to talk, that's a really good idea. Also, this goes to don't let things get too far away from you as well. So as you're talking, say what you want to say pretty concisely and then stop talking. Oftentimes we really want to show that we know so many things, that there's so many things we can bring to this company, that we can bring to this position, so many things we know, but you stay with the things that are really focused, and generally stay with things that are pretty focused on what responds to this question. Yes, you might also want to talk about this other experience that you haven't touched on yet in the interview. It might come up later. Don't try to, it's like with an essay response on an exam. Answer the question, stay pretty focused. If you answer a ton of stuff, you might get some things wrong down here in an essay, right? And so even though you're trying to put out all the information you know about Freud in your essay exam, that might not be as useful as just answering the question. It's the same kind of idea.
My next tip would be to show your workings out. Now, in every interview, there are going to be some stretch questions. These are questions which they're not necessarily expecting you to have an answer for, but they kind of want to see how you approach things and how you can think critically. Now, I think the temptation for these questions is only to say the things that you were definitely sure about, which is exactly what I did. Unfortunately, for that question, there wasn't actually all that much that I was sure about, so I ended up saying not a lot and moved on to the next question very quickly. I think there I really missed an opportunity to show my thought process, to show some of the things that I was weighing up, the things that I was considering. Surprisingly, interviewers aren't telepathic, so unless you spell it out for them, put it on the table, they're not going to know all the interesting things that are happening in your head. Showing your workings out not only shows them what you do know, but also how you can approach a challenge and how you can think critically. Granted, there are going to be some stretch questions which are just beyond one's capability, which brings me on to tip number 9.
So with those stretch questions, and not every question is you're going to need to talk about how you work things out, but it's really for those stretch questions, those things where they're trying to make you think about it in a different way, trying to put things together in a different way. Those are the ones where you want to do this. You don't have to do that technique for every single question.
So my tip number 9 would be to have an action plan in place for when your mind goes blank or you just do not know the answer. It's probably going to happen. It's okay. Like for one of my interviews, I was asked to talk about a statistical test on the spot for a research project that I designed in the interview, and I was literally like, ah! But luckily I had a bit of a strategy in place so that I could deal with that situation calmly. I think more often than not, the interviewers know that you're probably not going to know the answer to these kinds of questions. They just want to see how you cope under pressure. So in my situation, I literally just responded, do you know what? I actually have no idea. And we moved on. We just moved on to the next question. And it was fine. The world did not implode. So I think try and come up with a response that feels comfortable for you and also just shows that you don't get faced by these kinds of situations. My final tip would be to bring a question. At the end of your interviews, they're usually going to go to you, do you have any questions? And it's kind of nice to bring something that isn't just,
when are we going to find out the outcome of this interview?
It doesn't have to be anything particularly fancy, exciting, or sophisticated. Maybe it's just something that you genuinely really want to know. But remember, this is your last opportunity to leave a positive, final impression on your interviewers. So it's good to come with a little something prepared. Right, those are my
So I'll say more about the come with a question as well. So this one specifically this video is really tailored to a clinical interview, like getting a program into a graduate program. So it's really focused on that. So the kind of overall thing is you know what you're going to be doing in a graduate program because you've gone through a class like this one that you're going through right now. So you kind of know what to expect. But if it's another kind of job at some company or nonprofit, you might not know what the day-to-day work environment is like. So this bring a question thing can be a really, really useful tool to let you know, is this a place you want to be spending your time and doing your labor for? So asking questions about what is the community culture like, or the company culture like, asking how did you take care of your employees during the pandemic? How did you protect clients during the pandemic? These are really relevant questions that could let you know, is this place going to be terrible to work? Or is this place going to be a good place where I want to spend 20 hours, 40 hours, 60 hours a week, right? Because that's a lot of your life, and asking these kinds of questions at the end of an interview is really, really relevant for knowing, is that something that you want to spend time on. So asking them, what's your favorite thing about working here? There's a lot of really generic questions that can apply in a lot of different ways. What's one of the more difficult things that you find working here? What is the most rewarding thing about working here? I have an example of a friend who asked, how is the community, or how is the company culture here? And they were on a panel with a couple interviewers, and all the interviewers kind of looked at each other like, and they really didn't want to answer. They were really nervous about the answer, and he was offered the job, didn't take the job there, just because he could tell from their response, and then they did actually say something afterwards, that it wasn't a great place to work, that they didn't like being there. And so if they didn't like being there, it kind of let my friend know, I don't want to work there either. So this ask a question is really, really useful in getting a job. For a graduate program, you kind of know what you're getting into going into a graduate program, so it's not as relevant that way. But in this kind of case, from this video's example, yes, asking a really good question about what the kind of coursework is like, how many faculty members are you going to be able to work with closely, things like that relevant to that area are really good. All right, so a really great video. That person has a lot more interviewing tips than I have myself, and probably a lot more skills than I have myself as well. So go over that before your next interview. Do a lot of practice. That's one of the biggest things, especially, at least for me, one of the biggest tools is doing practice interviews. And so I've done this with colleagues that are in the field. I've done this with just friends, my partner, and in career centers. So appearance, yeah, just be a little more formal than the people in that company. So that one step above, if people are, look at whatever they're wearing and just be one step a little more formal than that. Be neat. You don't have to be flashy. I've heard different people say rules of like this many pieces of jewelry or things like that. Just don't be too flashy. Look neat, whatever that means to you. Your poise and eye contact. There's definitely, especially if you're someone who's neurodivergent, you might have a lot more eye contact or a lot less eye contact than a general person. There can definitely be too much eye contact during an interview. There was one time I was finishing up an interview, and I had really tried to focus on keeping good eye contact. And like, your eye contact was too much in this interview. You made me a little nervous. I didn't get that job. But it was obviously bad enough that they mentioned it to me rather than just letting it go. But sitting up straight, having your hands, doing something with them, whether it's like holding a notebook. This is another reason I like to hold a notebook, is because I like to fidget with my hands. I just tend to do that. So if I'm holding a notebook and a pencil, that's a lot better. So try and look relaxed and attentive. Even if you're super stressed out, try your best to look relaxed, and definitely do be attentive. Listen to those questions. Think of a thoughtful answer. Comfortable eye contact. Don't creep people out with too much eye contact like me. Silence your cell phone. This is one thing that I even forget sometimes doing these recordings. I realize I turned the volume all the way down, but I hadn't actually turned it on vibrate right before starting this lecture recording. So definitely remember to do that. Listen to the interviewer. Make sure you are listening to the questions. You want to answer the question that they're asking, or the multiple questions that they're asking, especially if it's a multi-part question, so that you know you're giving a good response. So asking questions shows interest and can really help show that you know about this job. If you've interned and you know this company had this challenge, ask them if they've experienced that same thing at this other place, right? So showing that you have knowledge of the job, what's going to be expected, and letting you know if you actually want to put in your energy to this organization is really, really important. So here's a couple example questions. What do you like best about working for the company? I think I said that one earlier. What's the culture like here? How has the company been faring in the economic climate? If you find out that it looks like this company might go under in a few months, are you going to want to join on with that company? If it really is the best option, maybe you still will. And then hopefully they will be okay. But it might let you know, oh, I don't actually want this position. What projects are you working on right now? This is really relevant in, say, this would be a really good one for a graduate school interview. What research are you working on right now? What's your current projects? What grants do you have? Or what grants are you applying for? That can be really good. What steps did your company take to protect workers during the pandemic? I think this one's really important to see what kind of things that the company does for you, the worker. I'm a worker. Probably a lot of you are all workers too. So we need to be able to use our labor in ways that is good for us, not just for companies, right? We need to spend our time and our energy well. So asking them what they did to protect workers as well as clients, if you're working with clients, is a very important question that I hope more people are asking. So, and then following up with an interviewer. So generally you want to follow up. You can follow up the immediate day after, like send a thank you email. But with this following up, I'm talking about following up, asking about the results of the interview. So definitely I do recommend, if you have an interview, send an email the next day, say, hey, thank you for interviewing me. I really enjoyed talking about X, Y, and Z, like some of the specifics from the interview, and saying, I look forward to hearing from you. You're not asking them in that immediate, like day after follow up, hey, what are the outcomes? Just saying thank you essentially, and putting a couple details in there so they can remember which person you were. So, and then to follow up about the results, do that about a week to a week and a half after the interview. So if it's a Tuesday, follow up, call them the next Wednesday, Thursday. That would be a great amount of time to find out. Unless they told you specifically, hey, we will let you know on this specific date. If you wait, let's say 2 days after that date to follow up, that would be fine. So if they've given you a specific date, you don't have to follow up the week after. So with this, the book recommends not contacting more than once. I would recommend waiting an additional week after your first follow-up and then contacting them again. So let's say I've had an interview and it's Tuesday. I follow up the next Wednesday. I still don't hear from them. I will follow up with them again the next Wednesday and then expect that I'm not going to be hearing from them. So I would recommend contacting twice. The book recommends contacting once. You can read arguments both ways. So that is the end of interviewing skills, resumes, CVs. Take a look at professionals in the fields, resumes and CVs. CVs are pretty easy to find for academics and researchers because we generally have them like linked in on a page. For a resume, that might be more difficult. If you're shadowing or interning or even working with a faculty member, asking them to see their resume might be a really good tool to show you like, oh, this is how they've organized it. They're really focusing on this, this, and this. So that can be a really good thing to do. But definitely use the career services, use services in the communities around you to work on interview skills, to proofread your CV, your resume, so that you can have those kind of this first impression be really, really good. Whether it's your personal statement that you are working on. Is the final one due this week? I'm getting a little confused with myself. Have people review those kinds of things so that you can make sure you're putting your best foot forward and giving yourself the best chance that you can. And good luck.